Welcome to today's webinar, a Funding Deep Dive Part 2. If you were with us last week for Part 1, welcome back. And if you're just joining us today for Part 2, we're really glad you're here. My name is Angel Vessa, and I'm the Director of Innovation here at ReFED. And joining me today is Michelle Chang, the Innovation Program Manager. And we're going to be your co-host for today. So why are we hosting this two-part event on fundraising for solution providers? Well, our innovation team is really dedicated to helping food waste solution providers like you access the information, insights, and resources you need to grow your impact. And one of the ways we do that is through programming like this, these Learning Labs series. And to kick off the series, we're starting off with one of the topics we hear about most often, fundraising, an area where many solution providers are often looking for support. Now, as I mentioned, we hosted part 1 of this event last week and heard from a variety of funders, including Arthur Chow from S2G Investments, Ida Posner, a trustee at Posner Foundation, and the founder of Hawthorne Food Ventures, and Jasmine Kern, the senior associate at Lever VC. And we heard a few really key takeaways that I'd like to highlight for you all. One is to really deeply understand funders' priorities. This is going to help ensure you're engaging funders that are a good fit for you, as well as guide you on how to best tailor your narrative. And that's the main second takeaway. You need to tailor your narrative so that you're addressing your audience's priorities and pressing needs. What is that problem that you're solving for them? And oftentimes that really means leading with the economics and the business case, like cost savings and path to scalability. And then that's followed by food waste and the broader environmental impact. Now, finally, we also talked a lot about taking this relationship-driven approach. Because when you're fundraising, you're essentially building a relationship, a partnership, right? And it's not about making this transactional ask, even though on the surface it might seem like it. So it's really important that because this is a relationship, you need to put in that time and effort to build and sustain it over time. Now, to learn more about it, I strongly encourage you to go check out the recording of part 1 using the link that's going to be sent through the chat. Now, it's helpful to understand these insights and really get into that mindset of a funder, but you might be wondering, how do I do that, right? Like, how do I do these things? And that's what we're going to be discussing. So during today's webinar, we're going to talk about how to prepare for a raise, how to craft and tailor your narrative while still staying true to your mission, and simple ways to really build and sustain those funder relationships. And we're also going to talk a bit about mindset and framings that will really help improve your overall approach to fundraising. And you all are in luck because today you're going to hear directly from some of the fundraising pros in the food waste space. They're going to share their lessons, mindsets, and tactics that they've honed over the years to really help you level up your own fundraising journey. So joining me today are Lydia Oxley, President at Renewal Mill, ReFED's very own Sam Buck, Director of Development and Strategic Impact, Cassie Herzog, Director of Development at Food Recovery Network, and Jo Marini, CEO and co-founder at Mothership Materials. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So for the audience, could you tell us a bit about yourself, kind of the work you're doing at your organization, and maybe one thing you really enjoy about fundraising? And Lydia, I'm going to ask you to kick us off.
Yeah, happy to get started. Thanks so much for joining, everybody. I'm Lydia Oxley, or as seen here, Johnson, choose your own adventure. I am president over at Renewal Mill, have a background in CPG, so been in food for a little while. And Renewal Mill is really focused on building out upcycled ingredients that exist within CPG products. One thing that I really enjoy about fundraising is really just that relationship development and some of the rooms that you kind of find yourself in. I've really found myself, especially here in New York, in some really funky environments, getting to know people that I never thought I would meet. So it's super unpredictable and something that you can just kind of like buckle up and really learn to enjoy.
Love that. Sam, I'll have you go next, and then Cassie, and finally Jo.
Funky environments is totally the name of the game. But good to meet everyone. Sam Buck, Director of Development and Strategic Impact at ReFED. I assume if you're on this call, you probably know a fair bit about ReFED, but my role specifically leading the development team, our strategy, our execution, and then on the other side, I focus on impact measurement. And of course, that has really strong ties to fundraising. If you can measure your impact, then you can tell better stories. And if you can tell better stories, then you should be a more effective fundraiser. I have been doing fundraising for a long time. Before this, I was in fundraising for education, worked at Stanford, worked at UC Santa Barbara for about 6 years. There's a lot that I love about fundraising, but I think my favorite part really is that relationship building piece that you mentioned. The best days are the ones where it's just an all access pass to meet really fascinating people and have wonderful conversations with them about impact and what it means and how they're weaving it into their life, and then hopefully build a partnership from there.
I love that. Cassie, over to you.
Great. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Cassie at Food Recovery Network. We're a national nonprofit that works with college students and food businesses to recover surplus food and donate it to hunger-fighting nonprofits that feed people. And I'm the Director of Development, so similar to Sam, leading our fundraising efforts at Food Recovery Network, whether it be through foundations and company support or individual donations. And I've been on the team for about 7 years and then focused specifically on fundraising for the past 5. Like a lot of folks on the call, I imagine that I fell into fundraising pretty much in my role, as I've heard a lot of fundraisers do in organizations. And I always like to share that my dad has always been a sales manager his entire life, and he was stoked when I became a fundraiser because he could give me all the advice about pitch decks and about pitching and everything. And similar to Sam and Lydia, my favorite part is just that relationship building. And then it's always a nice bonus when you're able to land that funding, and it's a great feeling to be able to build that relationship for your organization.
Thanks, Cassie. Jo?
Hi all, I'm Jo Marini. I am the CEO and co-founder of Mothership Materials. And Mothership Materials is based on a medical therapeutics technology that uses physics instead of chemistry. And we figured out how to do the industrial upscaling of that technology to take agriculture and food waste, so like really large volumes, sort the molecules, and then turn those molecules into feedstocks for biomanufacturing. So instead of using fossil fuels, we transition to things like sugar inputs, cellulose inputs, proteins, lipids that can power biomanufacturing. This is my 4th startup. And so while I potentially have a little bit of a different relationship with fundraising than we've heard so far, I have gotten quite a bit of exposure to it. And I think at this stage, while love is a strong word, I would say that that I've come to appreciate it from the perspective that it really forces me to get super clear on what my story is. What am I doing? Why am I here? Why am I talking to you in this room? And if I am going to develop a relationship with you, why are we developing it, right? What there is going to be mutually beneficial? And I think that without that, I wouldn't be so clear on that today. And so that's definitely a muscle that I've had to work over time.
Thank you for sharing that. Maybe just to start off our conversation, taking a step back, before you're even talking to funders, let's talk about how you prepare for a raise, right? So help the audience understand, like, before a founder or an organization goes out to raise that capital, what kind of groundwork needs to happen, and making sure they're spending their time smartly in a way that's really separating those who are successful from those who maybe struggle. Maybe Sam, I'll ask you to kick us off with some thoughts there.
Yeah, I love that we're starting here. Anytime I talk to a fundraising shop, I tell them to overinvest in the early stage ground game, because if you overinvest here, you're going to save yourself so much time on the back end, because you're having conversations that actually could lead to something, and it's just going to be a happier environment for everyone. When I think about how I actually invest that time in those early stage ground game portions, it's really looking for strong interest or alignment. And in order to do that, you need to come up with a gift menu. Like, you need to be really, really clear on what exactly it is that you're fundraising for, what your organization is doing. But if you can, even tearing off restricted giving opportunities. At ReFED, certain funders aren't going to give to all of ReFED, but they might want to support our use of data science and AI and machine learning. Tear that off so that you can identify alignment, not just for your organization, but for specific initiatives within it. And then beyond that, I'm looking for capacity. It's great when people give smaller dollars, it adds up and makes a real difference for every organization. But if you're going to create a strategy, go after the whales that are going to really move the needle on your budget. That's who you want to build your strategy around. And then you're also looking for timing. You can learn a lot from looking at websites and blog posts about where funders are in their cycle. Pay attention to that because the window that you're fundraising in really matters. And then the last thing is once you've found that really strong alignment, start looking for connections because in today's day and age where information is so easy to get, it's harder than ever to cut through the noise because there's an awful lot of noise. So find that warm intro as best you can.
I like that. I'm hearing a lot about, right, trying to find that strategic alignment, how important timing is, and then leveraging your network really to make those connections. So I love all of that. Jo, I know you just maybe finished raising recently, if I remember correctly. Anything you would share from the for-profit perspective?
Yeah, I think that, to sort of from for-profit, it's very much the same as, kind of you start where Sam kind of started us, which is like, what are you raising for? Right. And I think, with for-profit, we have some options around like building a capital stack, right? Because different types of money are good for different things. So if you're going to give someone equity in your company, right, that is for a very specific thing, as opposed to if you maybe have a customer or you have to build hardware or you need to buy certain equipment, right? So different types of capital are good for different things. And you kind of just, for a for-profit company, maybe don't need to lump it all under, venture capital, right? And take that hit on the dilution. So you kind of need to understand what it is you're raising for, what types of capital are good for different things. And then you kind of are like, okay, well, this is what I think my pie looks like, right? I've got 50% that's going to maybe VCs, and I've got, maybe 10% here that's a really good fit for grants, and you kind of break that up. I will say that one of the things that surprised me this time around is that I kind of had that plan in mind, but there were a few times when I met an investor who ended up being a really strong strategic partner also. And it almost, not to say that it shifted the direction of where we were going, but it was a really interesting micro correction. And I think it really validated that, okay, yes, we are building in the right place. This is aligned. And because like the money is coming from someone that has a specific interest in a vested outcome, we were able to sort of move that piece of our business forward faster. And so, kind of really shored up like, yep, this is exactly where we're going. And we have the partners to back it up. And that kind of made the rest of the raise easier. So I will say, like, for me, especially if you, maybe last thing to say about it is if you are raising venture capital right now as a for-profit business, like, I don't think it's any secret that the environment's pretty rough. And the first thing anyone says is like, ooh, tough time to raise. And it is, right? Like, it is a tough time to raise. But I think, having that plan in place, understanding what you're raising for and why, and really, continuing to sort of pulse check and make sure, right, you're getting validation, right, that you're in the right place has been really helpful for us. And so we're not quite done. We have a tiny bit left, but we were able to get it done in the last 4 to 5 months.
That's great. Congratulations. I love the iteration piece there that you talked about. It's important to be able to hear that. Lydia or Cassie, anything else you would add?
A few things on this, and I mean, Jo, you totally have it correct. And like the trenches is the accurate term. I think like when looking at this world, it's just a matter of looking at it a little bit different right now. And to Sam's point too, like using different tools. Within different industries, I'm seeing more of these Google Sheets that have like new funds and then like information on the new funds. I can find one that exists within food and CPG right now and follow up with it. I'd have to dig it up, but like those kind of things are immensely helpful because you have to be aware of where people are in their cycle right now to gather people like when they're going to be in the right attention span element. I also think too, and this is just for our niche little world of food waste, is when you think about something like manufacturing or upcycling, some things are going to be in your hands and some things are going to be in the mercy of things like byproducts, for instance. So you want to be thinking about where you might especially need alignment. So for us, for instance, it's plant-based milk manufacturers. So making sure like they're along for the ride, we're going to be holding hands throughout. Our growth aligns with what they're thinking. Are they planning on moving to Canada anytime soon? Like that kind of stuff is like really important to know going in so that nothing gets pulled out from underneath you. And sometimes they can surprise you as well for actually being on board and wanting to be a part of that too. So alignment within manufacturing is really important. But I think kind of like the TLDR for this is like overthink it, but don't overthink it, because ultimately this is just about what is the next chapter going to be for you? And then how are you going to fuel it? And being able to answer that question really, really clearly, and something that feels really tangible for people that are involved.
Yeah, I like that. I think the funders from the first part talked about that a bit too, right? And having that clear next step, but also making sure that the steps to get there are realistic and make sense for where you're at. So definitely, I think resonates with what some of the funders are saying. Cassie, what were you going to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add from the nonprofit perspective, building on what Sam said and building, a lot of work within the research component. I always suggest not to skip the 990 when you're looking at foundation funds. You can find so much information on other organizations they support, the amount of grant dollars they might have directed, or how their team is organized. Or on the corporate side, I always like to look at impact reports. Maybe they have a sustainability report. They don't necessarily have like a public 990, but a sustainability report that talks about their priority areas or different organizations they've supported. It may not always have the numbers exactly, but it'll give you more insight into their priority areas specifically. And then particularly when we're talking about more, cold applications or approaching it from a cold perspective, you don't have a direct connection. I would say always just introducing yourself over email or call if they have it, just to be able to say, here's who we are, here's how we see alignment, and then also asking those clarifying questions as well that you might have that their website doesn't show. So for example, we recently were looking at a grocery store based in California for funding, and we had a pitch for programs specific to San Diego, but I noticed that the grocery store was based in Northern California, but it didn't quite say on their website what part of California. So I was thinking maybe they're only focused on Northern, but there's a chance they support all of California. So rather than just spending the time to submit a cold application, we just reached out via email, introduced ourselves, our work within San Diego, and asked the question to see, is this aligned? It ended up not being, so that's fine. And we can then move our team along to other aligned opportunities too.
That's a great example, Cassie. Thank you for sharing that. And it nicely segues into something that I was thinking about too, of like, what if you do get kind of maybe even a connection to a funder and maybe they want something, but it doesn't fully align? Like, how do you manage that? How do you know when it is like good feedback and something you should iterate on, or it's completely not aligned? Could you share more on how to figure out where to best spend your time on certain funders?
Yeah, definitely. It's a great question. And especially for, I imagine, a lot of folks on the call probably have small fundraising teams that are working towards this. So we're always trying to maximize our capacity as small teams. And so, touching again on spending a lot of time on that research component and coming from the perspective, if I were the funder, would I be able to clearly see this alignment, between the organization and my priority areas? Is there a direct tie? A lot of times our team talks about how deep in the onion is kind of a unique metaphor, I guess, but our chief operating officer uses it. Like, how many layers do you have to peel back to get to that alignment? And if it's too many layers that, we're aligned in this specific thing, but it's only one subset of one priority that they have, that might be too deep in the onion and may not be worth your time or their time. And so I also like to think about it often as a Venn diagram as well. What are your priorities? And again, what you're trying to fundraise for, and their priorities and their giving ranges, and where do you have that overlap? And then just overemphasizing where that overlap is. And then the third thing I'll add, and curious what other folks here think too, is just being really honest with yourselves. You never want to stretch your mission or drift away from your mission just to go for those dollars and bigger dollars. Ultimately, in the long run, it'll probably cause you more issues than just being open to saying no when it's not a fit, and then spending more of your time and prioritizing those more aligned opportunities.
Can I jump in and double down on what Cassie said? I love the onion metaphor and I'm going to steal it. I've always called it, is there true alignment or is there squinting alignment? Are you like really looking and having rose-colored glasses and staring in the sun and then looking back and be like, yeah, they might fund us. And being really honest with yourself and almost like ruthless in who you're cutting out and who you're focusing on. That is how you're going to save the most time as you go further on in the process.
I think that that's a hard thing to do too, right? When you're like, I just got to get this money in the bank, right? And it's you're like, should I just say yes now? Because if I don't say yes now, like then, it might not come again. But I think to your point, like it does, right? And I think it's definitely that's such a great piece of advice.
The one quick piece that I'd add is if you do a good job on that alignment and finding those conversations that you want to have, being honest, not 100% of those are going to be hits where they're actually giving you dollars. But if you found true alignment, those conversations are always going to be productive because they're active in the space that you want to be active in. So maybe the funding didn't work out, but they're going to have connections. They're going to have expertise. They're going to offer you breadcrumbs that leads to something really, really great. That only happens if you do that upfront research really well.
Mm-hmm.
I have nothing huge to add here, but we'll say from a CRM element early on, being able to kind of map out based on when they want to be wrapping up investments, as well as like when grant deadlines are and like having things kind of all mapped out calendar wise. And then also too, just having like a secondary connection in mind. So like we've talked to a lot of investors before that are like super CPG and they want like branded CPG, like very much like the vibiness of the CPG brands, and I'll always try and introduce them to someone else that is definitely looking for funding that is a little bit more aligned with what they're looking for.
Nice relationship tactic. But I also like what you were talking about of having this everything mapped out. I imagine, and I haven't had to be in your seat before, but I imagine it can be really overwhelming navigating the fundraising landscape. So putting that structure in place with those timings, with those flows can probably help manage it a little bit better for people who are still maybe figuring out their own fundraising strategy. So I love that, Lydia. I want to take a step back though, because we are talking a lot about alignment, but let's say you've done the groundwork, you found some funders that you think are great, but you don't know them. You talked a little bit about network, which is great. Are there other ways that you found are really good to get in front of them beyond just I'll try the cold email and maybe I'll just ask my network if they know someone? Are there any other ways that people can figure out how to get in front of a funder they want to talk to?
I mean, I think events are great,
Mm.
right? Especially now, right? You have, climate weeks in almost every big city. And, investors, and especially, if it's a slightly even like, larger office that has some staff, like somebody is attending something somewhere and speaking or in attendance. And so I think that, that's been really great. Also, we've done a number of, even before we did this raise, right, a number of sort of accelerators, right, or different programs that will also help you with those connections, right? And they sort of have those relationships or they put you in the room together, which has been, really helpful as well.
+1 on the events. I think we've had some really awesome investor related events that have been like very in your face. We are raising around, come through, but we've also had just like very kind of like sidelined adjacent things, whether it be like Earth Month events or like culinary events. Even just, I mean, Angel, you've been to a girlies and flower arranging party. So I think that you can do like side things too. And even if it's not an investor play, it can turn into a lot of times press too. We've gotten some really good press hits just by kind of like being in the right room and having something fun going on. So,
which is such a good point, right? Because we talk a lot about like, like obviously we're talking all about investment today, but at the end of the day, it's like, is this person stoked about what I'm building? And
yeah.
like sometimes like, we do a lot of this now, right, behind a screen, but there is nothing that can get someone excited or like mutually excited, right, about this person is going to be a great partner and this person is going to be a great person to invest in than like being together in the room and like geeking out over a common interest.
Well, for sure. And I think like a big piece of this too, and what's kind of nice about fundraising is it allows you to kind of remove yourself from the marketing metrics. And really the main metric is, am I showing up as myself and making a meaningful connection with someone that could support this? And that is a win. So it takes a little bit of the pressure out of kind of like event execution and all of the things that come along with a typical marketing kind of thing.
I would double down. Warm intros, events, those are always the gold standard. But in the event that that is not possible, I would just remind everyone that not all cold emails are created equal, and you can get really creative. I got in front of a funder one time because they owned an ice cream shop. This was when I was working at Stanford, and they were an alum. I wanted them to give, and I sent them literally a photo of me eating their ice cream at their store and include this pitch on why I wanted to meet. That cut through the noise and it led to a great conversation. And so sometimes you do just have to work with what you've got. The other thing is that if you do, not to overhinge on alignment, but if you just say, hey, we're both working on climate, that's not a great cold email. If you say, I saw you funded this organization that did this thing and we're trying to do something similar and we could use your advice, that's a wonderful cold email.
Very much agreed. I love that ice cream example, Sam. That's really cool. I'll just add on our end to try to go at, I know in the last webinar for folks that joined, Arthur Chow mentioned the 6 degrees of connection and playing with not only who your team or maybe your leadership is connected to, but also folks in your network, especially going back to what we talked about, if it's a no for a funder, oftentimes I will also then turn the question, are there any other funders or foundations in your network or in your community that you would recommend now that you know a bit more about us that we should, get in touch with or research further? And something that also to try to get at that 6 degrees of connection we do at Food Recovery Network, which has worked pretty well, especially for those long game sort of connections that you're looking for, is when we're doing our research and we identify a foundation or a company that's aligned, but either they're invite only process, or maybe they're a giant corporation that a cold email may have a hard time getting through to, we add them to what we call our e-intro list. And then just about once a month, our executive director will take a batch off of that list and send it to our board or to send it to our, advisors or anyone that's interested in supporting the work of Food Recovery Network that might have connections in the space. And we found that to be pretty successful, whereas, we wouldn't have otherwise known. For example, one of our board members' dads is a partner at a law firm that has a foundation that we're trying to go for, right? And so just playing those 6 degrees of connections and having a running list. So when people say, whether they can't give you money or they want to somehow support you in other ways, here's a list of organizations that we would love introductions to if you somehow have a connection. And again, just using LinkedIn to yourself also really helps.
That's great. I love all the creativity here, just getting that initial conversation going. And I'm curious that once you have that, want to talk a bit about now it's time to really sell your company and your work. What are some of the key things that you're including in your pitch or narrative? And no matter who's in the audience and but then how are you tailoring it? Can you talk us through how you work through that?
I'm probably embarrassingly going to admit that I have made 100 versions of my pitch deck before I found something that worked. It took me a really long time to figure it out. I think a lot of times, right, as founders or as the people that are closest to our business, like it's really hard to separate ourselves from the story that's going to resonate, because for us, like it's all great, right? Here, I could do this and this and this, and we have like a 10,000 things we're doing, and don't you want to know everything? And like they don't. They absolutely don't. But I think the thing that I had to figure out, and I think this is really particular to my type of venture, right? Like a for-profit company, is before anything else, what is my business, right? Like, how am I making money? Because the tech is cool and the market's cool and the products are cool and the branding's cool. The climate impact is cool. None of this matters when you're raising venture capital if you cannot first say, look, first and foremost, this is a great business, right? It's serving a need. People are willing to pay for it. Here's how much money it's going to make for me and for you, right? Because venture has to return dollars, right? That's the whole point, right, of their game. And then after that, right, there's the nuance and the unfolding of, and now that you know, right, now that you're locked into the fact that I've built an incredible business, let me talk to you about all the different types of impact and the ripple effect this makes, right? What is the economic impact, right? What is the climate impact, right? how is this sort of changing paradigms, the way we think about supply chains and manufacturing and sort of shifting systems? And then I can get into all of that. But I really had to like create this undeniable, like, sort of unbreakable association with the fact that Mothership Materials has an incredible business, and also, right, it is now going to meet all of the criteria of the thesis of whether that be, who's giving the grant money, or, who's writing the check, or, who's the angel investor or whatnot.
I love that, Joe, because I know they mentioned on the last webinar, someone mentioned like show your passion, let your passion shine through. And even just you talking about it right now, I can feel it. And so just really coming first with your passion for your movement will already excite someone that's interested. And then going at that Venn diagram again, where do you have that alignment, and doubling down on those areas specifically. So for our work at Food Recovery Network, I can have a whole different, perspective, whether it's hunger and addressing food access, or if it's food waste and climate change, or even, college student leadership, and so on and so forth, and looking at where is the funder going to be most aligned with those specifics, and then what pitch is the best for that specific alignment. And I will also say that in our work, we've really tried to refine more and more depending on the type of funder, right? Like a company will have a very different interest in investing in, certain programs, or particularly want maybe more brand visibility than something like a family foundation that's just looking to support work in a specific community, let's say. And so we've worked a lot on tailoring not only our pitches, but also the materials that come along with the pitches for different types of funders specifically.
I would add there's a little bit of sequencing to this, but depending on where your organization is in its journey, the first thing you need to do is find those early adopters. Like, not every funder is willing to take risk and be the first one to bet on your organization or your startup. So find those that are willing to make those first bets. And then after you've done that, do a really good job of using the fact that you got those early bets as strong stamps of approval and social signals so you can crowd in other funders. So find the early adopters, the risk takers, and then find the fast followers and leverage the fact that you had the early adopters already.
Yeah, I think all of this. I mean, I think that the iterative aspect of speaking to different types of funders is very big and real. I've found that in our different types of investors, we have the passionate types that will really resonate with your passion for your solution. And then you'll have kind of like the nuts and bolts types that'll really try to drive down on the business structure and that kind of thing. Early on, you want to identify what kind of type of person you're talking to. You can usually tell very early on. So it's always nice to maybe have some kind of like a pulse check before you send them anything super material. And also just be real with yourself about what your natural inclination is for how you tell your story. I think like a lot of us here are very passion forward, which is like obviously the best one. But you want to kind of think about like, what's your nuts and bolts pitch, and how are you refining that? So I've put a lot of extra oomph into working on the numbers and the structure and being able to really tell that story versus just the passion story. And I think that helps a ton too. And then the giant caveat to all of this is it's so subjective. Like, I have sent over pitch decks that I have refined the crap out of. I think they're absolute slam dunks, and some people love them and some people are like, this doesn't make any sense. So at the end of the day, it's kind of it's all made up and the points don't matter a little bit. So so can't be too terribly hard on yourself as you're figuring it out.
Yeah, that's fair. And I like the human element there too, because I've been fortunate to see Sam like work his magic and be on different calls with different funders. And there are some who are ready to just chat about their weekend before really getting into things. And there's some who are like, listen, I have a million questions and I want to get into all the numbers right now. And you just got to read them, but you got to be prepared. And so I'm hearing a little bit, right? There's some passion involved, and some funders are going to love it. And a lot of funders might also want to hear, tell me those unit economics. Tell me how you're going to scale. And you need to be prepared for all of that, and then read that person and bring in that right story. I think the common thing I hear, and I'm curious from you all, both from philanthropic funders and even from, the VCs and angels of the world, at the end of the day, still want to see you all making money, somehow or growing somehow. And I think that story does need to come through no matter who you're talking to. But related to that, not only, especially in our world, not only how are you making money, but we're all solving food waste, right? So these funders are looking at similar solutions day in and day out. And so I'm curious, how have you figured out how to show like, no, you need to fund me. This is what makes me unique and our organization unique. And this is why we are going to really, get the market or make that huge impact. So I'm curious how you've worked through that, telling that competitive advantage story.
To jump in here, I find that particularly paying attention to what sparks interest on calls, like if I have one of those calls where we're aligned in many different ways, so I'm kind of sharing all the things and seeing like what over time with different people and different funders, like what's catching their attention, right? Like what is most intriguing to them across a variety of different funders. So in our case at Food Recovery Network, a lot of funders are really interested that we work with college students, right? That makes us a bit more unique. Not a lot of food recovery organizations or, organizations at large can always like touch college students. So is what we've noticed can set us apart, because we've noticed that intrigue and those follow-up questions that we've had on calls with funders. And so being able to shine that forward and showing our uniqueness just based on the reactions that we get from funders has been just a way that I've tried to pay more attention. And then also I'll add, I really liked what Ida mentioned on the last webinar, that pitching is just as much as talking as it is listening as well. And particularly, again, to that point, like paying attention to what the funders are asking questions about, or, trying to drill in down more closely, really listening to where they see the alignment and then honing in from there. I think just on this conversation at large, it's just a lot of adapting really in the moment, whether you're on the call with them or, had the call, but then you're drafting your pitch deck and, maybe adapting it based on what you originally thought, but really paying attention along the way to be able to identify something that's more closely aligned together and showing truly what your uniqueness is and what your solution is and how that relates to their mission and their priorities.
It's a really good point. And I think I had mentioned earlier that I had done all these versions of my pitch deck. And the reality is that I've stripped it back to the most basic deck. And now, and because I've done it so many times, I will, have this ability now, I think, Cassie, to your point, to kind of read the virtual room or read the room, and be able to sort of tailor that narrative. Or sometimes I just ask questions, right? I think sometimes when we begin, we think that we're doing all the talking, and it's a very pull sort of relationship where whoever we're talking to is asking us questions and we're responding. But I found that at this point, I am so comfortable with my own narrative that I can start asking questions, and based on those responses, right, have it really be a two-way conversation, which actually is really helpful for me, right? It makes me a better pitcher. It helps me understand, it kind of, maybe even uncover some things about my own value proposition that might not have clicked in that way for me before. And so I found that, it ends, at least now, it is for me a very simple deck that has all of the really basic elements that I know I need to touch on. And then sort of this conversation that allows me to adapt in the moment and make sure that I'm telling the right parts of the right story and pull out those things that I know are going to be great, instead of me having a slide and be like, here are the 22 bullets about why I'm better than everybody else. Right. And it can sort of be a lot more interactive. And sometimes we end up just going really, really deep on that one thing that super, super matters to them. And sometimes, I think in actually 2 or 3 cases, that has been what has closed that check for us.
I agree with everything that everyone said. I would also add that the first gift or first investment and how you get that is so different from how you get follow-on gifts and follow-on investment. And so for that first one especially, I think you can overinvest in the squishy stuff, the relationship building. I'm a big believer that people are giving with a little bit of a hope and a prayer, and they do that for people that they like. They do that for people that they believe in and want to be on the same team of. After that, there's a little bit more proof is in the pudding. Show me the impact, show me the dollars. But that first one, it is really built on hope and a solid foundation of relationships.
I really appreciate the comment that Jo made about how there's a few different ways to say things to different people. Kind of similar to that passion versus nuts and bolt person. There's also going to be kind of different flavors of how you talk about yourself, not necessarily changing any central elements of it. But especially for us, like we're all in things that are improving our world, whether it be environmentally or social good. But I think you also want to be able to walk in the room and talk to someone who is maybe less centrally thinking about that thing, and really understand your direct environment. So kind of a tangible example for us is our ingredients are gluten-free. And if you've ever had a bad gluten-free product, which is like everyone, over the last few years, a lot of our development has been with one of the central chefs that has worked with improving gluten-free foods. So I could have a whole talk with an investor that almost like barely mentions the sustainability aspect, just because I understand where we stand on shelf. And I think that like challenging yourself to think outside of your passion and goodness and reason for being there, and just thinking about like the most pure nuts and bolts of what's next to you on the shelf, it helps you think about yourself a little bit more differently. And you might be able to pull that out back into the passionate story that's really true to yourself, just using that greater awareness and understanding of your space. So
I love all of that. I appreciate kind of the nuance there. And I'm you guys are starting to talk a lot about that relationship building. And I imagine too, right, once you start building that relationship, you start getting some of those tougher questions potentially that really dig into your work. And so I am curious kind of how you handle some of those tough challenges, those tough challenging questions, then you need to talk to your funder about it. How do you have that transparency with them?
Go for it, Jo. I'll go
Are you
after you.
sure? Okay,
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I actually don't know if this is the case for nonprofit fundraising, but and this actually goes back to the very first question, and I did not say it, and I should have in preparation. Get your data room ready, right? Like you need to have your documents together, because the worst thing that happens is an investor is interested, like, cool, send me your data room, and you're like, great, I have to build that from scratch, right? And essentially what that is, right? If you're not familiar, it is a platform. I use Notion. It's like a Notion skin on top of a Google Drive that anybody can access. And it is an organized folder system of everything, like in groups, everything from like, these are my incorporation documents, right? Down to there's a section, this is my cap table, and this is who sits on it, and this is how much they own, down to my technical documents. This is my patent catalog, right? This is my customer list and where they are. These are my LOIs, right? It's everything about my company organized in one place. I think for us, if you are in a situation where you sort of have a deep tech, or what like we call like a folk or like a first of a kind technology that you're working on, you're going to have people that just, no matter what you say, they're going to be like, I don't believe this is going to work. It's like, okay, fine. Right. And so I think there's a level of, I'm going to be as transparent as I can possibly be within the bounds of what I feel comfortable with confidentiality. And at a certain point, that's either going to work for you or it's not going to work for you. Right. And if it doesn't work for you, then I think that's a point where you're like, hey, maybe then this is not a great fit. Right. Or, I mean, I've certainly had situations where, you know, I've answered every single diligence question to the absolute best of my ability, and it still wasn't good enough. Right. That's okay too. And maybe the last thing I want to say about this is that doubt doesn't mean that what you're building is not correct. Right? You are the world expert in the thing that you are building, right? No matter what that is. And so I think that, you know, making sure that, you know, you decide when you've sort of reached the limit of your tough questions, when you sort of exceeded your own personal boundaries of transparency, right? You know, when you put together the best data room you possibly can to give everyone all the information you want to give them. And then you say, all right, cool. Well, you know, this is still my North Star, right? This is still what I'm tracking on. This is what I know is going to work. And, you know, then at that point, I'm like, you know, hey, you know, this is great. Thanks for your time. You know, we're going to keep in touch.
On the nonprofit side, I would first just say don't shy away from tough conversations. Don't shy away from the challenges that you're facing. Funders are incredibly savvy folks. There's never been in the history of the world an organization that is trying to do something that is really, really hard and had everything gone 100% right. They expect things to go wrong. They expect challenges to come up and barriers. And they are such an undertapped resource for being a thought partner on how can you get around that challenge. Who's in their network? Do you need more funding? Does someone have funding in their network? Have they just been exposed to this challenge from one of the other grantees that they have in their portfolio? I think that funders, because people are scared to bring their challenges to them, are probably the most undertapped resource that nonprofits can use. They are a wealth of information. And it also, if you frame the conversation that way, focuses less on what's going wrong and focuses much more on, okay, we're on the same team here. We all want the same thing, the same outcome. How can we join forces and collaborate on something productive?
That's a really good point, Sam. I appreciate that about the untapped resource, most definitely. I think also what I will add is, as you know, Jo mentioned and Sam as well, just being very transparent. And oftentimes that will take a lot of proactivity, right? Let's say you got some funding, something went awry, and now your goals are shifted, or something, you know, you're coming across this challenge and you're having to pivot. And so that takes some proactivity to understand what with your team, what's happening, why is it happening, how are we adjusting, and then how are we going to communicate that to the funder? Because we like to often have the rule trying not to say something went wrong in the final report, rather than saying, you know, midway through the year, hey, this is what's happening, these are the challenges we're coming across, here's what we want to do about it, and you know, here's kind of walking them along the process with us. And I will say 9 times out of 10, we've had positive feedback from our funders that are just saying, okay, great, sounds good, thanks for letting me know, go forth. But I also appreciate what Sam said about tapping into that resource, particularly to help you solve those challenges too.
Yeah, I think especially speaking to transparency, which I think everybody mentioned on this, I think we have to assume positive intent at the end of the day, and that helps me. And I think a large part of this that affects probably everybody here is that food waste in general typically exists within hidden places. So our world that we're talking about is going to be inherently hidden, and we have to be extra transparent there. Even beyond just explaining our business models and things like that, there's interconnected pieces within, whether it's behind an NDA or in a undisclosed location with a partner that you can't really talk about. Like, all of that stuff is really tricky, and so we have to be as transparent as possible, and just not be super personally offended if they don't get it, because again, like, we are in hidden environments most of the time when it comes to food waste. So kind of a funky part of our world.
Yeah, definitely. I do really appreciate, you know, everyone talking about transparency. I think that proactiveness too of being upfront with your funders really helps them build confidence in you too. And so I think these are all really great points. I am curious, just as you've all mentioned, there's not always going to be a yes, but you might meet a funder who's just not a good fit right now. And we've talked a lot about how really this is all about relationships. So I'm curious to kind of hear from you all. How do you maintain relationships with funders, especially if maybe they said no or it just isn't the right time? How do you find that balance of how much follow-up is too much? Can you walk us through how you maintain those relationships?
I think kind of to an earlier point on this, I love keeping just a running tally of folks in my life that are looking for funding, and being able to match people up. Sometimes they only have a little bit of money left within a fund, or they're only looking for one type of thing within a fund, but the next one, they're going to be focusing on your specific type of thing. Just keeping people in mind that are going to be a good match has gone a long way for us.
I would just say like the art of relationship building is making it look effortless when oftentimes there's an awful lot of effort that goes in on the back, and people have talked about those spreadsheets that people are keeping track of, and when did you reach out last and what are their different interests. I do think that if you're doing relationship building in mass and it is your role, you need to invest in some sort of system like that. And it feels a little bit weird to do at first. It feels like you're manufacturing a process that shouldn't need to be manufactured. But the fact is, it kind of does when it's your role. And it starts feeling effortless and it's more fun for everybody. If I remember that someone was visiting Taos and they were going skiing, and then I go to Taos, I can shoot them a note and be like, I was just there. You were so right. That bar was absolutely incredible. Thanks for the note. Those types of things that show you're top of mind are they're just so much more meaningful, and they break through the noise in a way that sending grant reports every single time to your mass list of funders is just not, it's not human enough.
I have a quarterly investor update list, and they are people that have invested in us and people that maybe have not invested in us, or maybe like not now, but later, or we were too early and they invested a little bit of a later stage. And that's just a way for me to hit like quick wins. It is not by any means fancy. It's bullets. Here's what we're up to. And also sometimes, you know, because you have spent time developing those relationships, something will happen, or to Lydia's point, there's someone in your network that's like, oh, like this person has to meet this person. And then you just sort of are able to be like, yes, and reach out, right, and make those connections. And, you know, in those moments, right, you have that little extra, you know, level of that feeling really personal. And I also invite everyone to everything. Like if I'm speaking at something, or if there's an event happening, right, you know, I'll sometimes reach out and be like, you know, hey, you know, I'll, you know, tag people on LinkedIn, right? Or, and I think at that point, right, too, it really doesn't feel so transactional, right? That's like, I think like when it really starts to feel like this is a mutually beneficial relationship and not something that is so performative.
Yes, to all of the above. We also similarly do like a quarterly touch point with all of our funders, and then we can also share that with folks that may have said no, but we want to cultivate over the long term to see if we can turn that no into a yes. And also, as Sam touched on, you know, those personal touch points and seeing what makes the most sense, and those systems of, you know, having a quarterly system or having that spreadsheet or whatever CRM you're working in, to be able to understand how you can plug in those different pieces, whether it be, you know, like a catch-all newsletter sort of thing, or that more personal touch point as well. And ultimately just remembering that we're just all humans here, and having, you know, any sort of touch point being that top of the inbox, and the more personal you can make it, the better. Still working within the capacity of your own team is really great.
Thank you for all of that. I think we have a couple of questions that came through directly to Michelle. So Michelle, I'm going to ask you to come on, maybe share a couple of the questions that came through.
Alrighty. So the first one for the group is, what's a mistake that you might have made in fundraising that others can learn from? So the folks on this call can learn from. Any great examples that you could speak to? Just leave that open.
I love putting us on the spot. Yeah, go ahead, Jo.
I've made them all.
Yeah.
Maybe the place to start is that, and I think I was talking with Angel with you about this earlier, is that there's oftentimes very conventional advice about this process, right? It must be done this way, or this is what you do, you know, or, you know, when you're fundraising, you know, you either are doing a price round, or you're doing a safe, or you have to have a lead, or you don't have to have a lead, right? And everyone's going to tell you that this is the way to do it. And I think in the beginning, when you're new, you feel like you have to do it right. And so you start following this advice. And I think the one thing that I did wrong, right, was follow someone else's advice. And I think you really have to filter. I mean, there is so much nuance to this, right? All of us are raising money, and all of us have a different shade, right, of something, right, that we need to consider that maybe someone else doesn't. And so I would say that really trying to like hold on tight to like what I thought was the right way to do it was my biggest mistake. And it was once I let go of that and I realized that my particular fundraising strategy, the one that was winning, was completely what everyone told me not to do. All of a sudden, like, you know, the gates parted and I was off. And so, you know, really, and I think, you know, we go back to that very beginning, like, do the prep, right? Like, you know, strong opinion, loosely held, right? Stay the course, right? But also like, you know, kind of know your truth. I think is the way out of that. And this way you sort of don't get stuck in maybe making that mistake for too long?
I'd say I always come back to fundraising is all about relationships. And I think when it comes to relationships, it's easy to let ego slip in and think that like this person is going to like me. I'm the right person for the job. I'm just doing it wrong. I'm going to approach it from a different tactic. I think the truth is sometimes you're just not the right person for the job. And there's someone else on your team that is going to really click with that individual. And the best thing for you to do is to pass them off. It's the best thing for the organization. It's best for them. It's the best for the person on your team. But it can be a little bit weird to admit to yourself that I'm just not cut out for this, but you'll be very happy you did.
Sam, that was one of the early reasons why I got involved in fundraising. Just for locale, as our co-founder is based in upstate New York. And I was closer to a lot of the conversations and was able to have them in person. So totally agree. Also, I think like on the flip side of this too is it doesn't have to be solo you team. We very much tag teams a lot of these efforts. And I think it's like the big reason why we closed the Series A last year. So being able to lean on others. I'd say like kind of, we haven't talked about it at all, but certainly worth mentioning in smaller organizations is the legal stuff. Make sure that like you're squared up on all of your like your lawyer. That's nice. Like have a good lawyer. I think especially like within the startup realm, that kind of stuff can feel really scary and big. And we're really thankful to have lawyers that were really supportive throughout. But like have that squared away. It's not like a cute, it's not a cute pointer, but yeah, good legal stuff.
I love that, Lydia. That's so true. You just have to have your ducks in a row, ultimately. I'll just add to, mistakes we've made, despite the amount of prep that we've done and the research and everything, you get on the call and you're like, well, this is not a fit for whatever reason, right? We've had a conversation where we saw a grant range that ranged, from like $200,000 to $5 million. And then we thought that was a bit big for us, but we can do it. And we have a pitch that is the line, let's go for it. We get on the call. They're saying, okay, actually, we're doing $1 million plus. And we're like, okay, this is not the right pitch for us. This is too big. Not yet. We'll get there, but not yet. And just being able to be honest with yourself on that call to know, okay, if this is not a fit, that's okay. Let's pivot. Like I said, if it's not a fit, in this case, the funder was a location specific. And so we said, now that you know everything about us and what we're looking for, are there other folks in your network or in your community that we might be able to connect to? Or similarly, I love how everyone has said on the call, groups in our network that we can turn these funders to as well. So just again, being honest with yourself and owning that mistake and just being able to move forward smoothly as possible is a good go-to.
Perfect. Well, maybe last question for you all, and we'll start wrapping up here. But if there was one key piece of advice or message, just one thing you want the audience to walk away with today, as concisely, you can use those pitch skills as possible. What do you want them to walk away with? Sam, I'll start with you.
Be really, 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 really honest about whether there is funder alignment and what you're trying to fundraise for.
Okay. Jo?
Once you have locked down what Sam just said, you need to be really, really, really resilient. Because you're going to hear no, you're going to hear 100 no's to every yes, and you just got to know that that's what's going to happen, right? And take care of yourself and know that it's a marathon and it's not a sprint, and buckle down and get it done.
Thank you. Cassie and then Lydia.
I'll just add, just really trusting your team, building a lot of trust with your team. As a development professional, you're leaning a lot on the programs team to understand their programs and the pitch, and being able to work together to form a pitch that's true to your mission and the team and what they're capable of as well. And again, just trusting that this is just a relationship with other folks. And Lydia, I'll let you wrap us up.
I would say all of the above. And the process is great sometimes, it sucks sometimes, but I think regardless, you're allowed to celebrate it, especially because everybody here is doing something good for the world. We're not fundraising for lame, boring net negative things. So we're allowed to celebrate the wins in this space because it is going towards the greater good.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for that reminder. Well, audience, let's give our speakers kind of all the virtual rounds of applause, reactions, send them some love over chat. We do have one key question for you all. If you could just quickly respond to this poll, giving us your feedback on today, we would really appreciate it. See several responses coming in. Thank you so much for your input and feedback. As those are coming in now, I just want to remind everyone that this is just the beginning. So if you have more feedback for us, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'll also be sending a survey. And if you want to stay up to date with all of the things that we're doing, please add yourself to our solution provider directory. And with that, thank you again to our amazing speakers for being with us today, and to all of you for making the effort to be here today, and for the important work you're doing on the ground to fight food waste. Your efforts are really amazing, and we're so grateful to be working alongside you. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day.